Hi, I'm Bridget Behe with Michigan State University. I'd like to tell you about a research project I worked on with the 10% Project and other researchers. We wanted to find out if we could create a way to attract new customers to local garden centers. That's an ambitious goal, but we broke our research project down into realistic steps so garden retailers everywhere could follow our guidelines and build a broader consumer base for themselves. This is the first of 5 videos to tell you what we learned about consumers and the marketing campaigns we created as a result. As we seek to understand how your potential customers think, we'll first thank the funding sponsors for this video series, American Hort, the USDA, and the Ohio Department of Agriculture. The research and marketing team was comprised of Carol Miller, editor, Meister Media Worldwide, Susan Hogan from Actionable Results and Research and also adjunct professor of marketing at Emory University, Lynn Swedinowski, founder and president, Creative Business Consulting Group, and myself, Bridget Behe, professor of horticulture at Michigan State University. The steps in our investigation were first to look at the basis for our research, understanding some of the industry literature and what we knew about Gen X and Gen Y. Then we gathered consumer insight. We identified key consumer-focused themes. We created marketing campaigns, recruited industry partners to implement those campaigns, and we monitored progress and success. In this video, we'll take a look at what the existing literature says about Gen X and Gen Y. Peter Drucker said in 2002 that managers have known for a long time that demographics matter, but they've always believed that population statistics change slowly. In this century, however, they don't. Indeed, the innovation opportunities made possible by changes in the numbers of people and in their age distribution, education, occupations, and geographic location are among the most rewarding and least risky of entrepreneurial pursuits. I think what Drucker was telling us in this article in the Harvard Business Review is that so much is known about demographic changes, yet businesses and individuals fail to act on those changes in a way that helps their business capitalize on them. Let's take a look at some of those demographic changes affecting our industry and others. In this graph, what we see are changes in the U.S. age groups from the year 2000 to 20 and 40. Notice that the yellow bar, which represents the percentage of individuals who are ages 20 to 44, declines over the years. Now, if we were in the market for college degrees or other products that younger age consumers wanted, we might have to think about what that declining demand might mean for us. But as we look at the percentage of individuals who are aged 45 to 64, we see that peaked a few years ago and will decline over the next couple of decades. I think one of the interesting demographic trends is the pink bar, which shows the percentage of individuals aged 65 to 84, which is going to peak about 2030 and then start to begin to decline. So we can see some of the age trends that are going to affect our industry and others shown in this graph. We can also look at age cohorts, or groups of people who are at a similar age or a similar life stage. Now, the GI or World War II generation, born before 1933, accounts for a fairly small percentage of the population, and many of them are over age 80 today. They were big horticulture consumers, but won't have the effect or the influence on the industry that they once had. The same could be said for the swing generation, those folks born between 1934 and 1945. They represent another small segment of the industry and are about age 68 to 79 today. Baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964, account for about 25% of the U.S. population. Today, their age ranges from 49 to 67 years. But this was the customer segment that really built the horticulture industry. What is causing some of the concern is the fact that Gen X, the generation after them, born between 1965 and 1976, account for only about 17% of the population. This is a little bit problematic in that we've gone from a fairly large segment of boomers to now a smaller segment of Gen Xers. Even more interesting is the generation to come after them, Gen Y or the millennials. Born between 1977 and 1995, they account for another quarter of the U.S. population and today range in age from 18 to 36 years. We don't know very much about the post-millennial buying behavior, but they represent about 11% of the population. But to the horticulture industry, because the boomers are approaching retirement years and we haven't seen the purchasing among the Gen X and the Gen Y consumers, it's causing some industry concerns. Here we see some information from the National Gardening Association that shows us the percentage of households that made purchases of annual vegetable and herb transplants from 1995 to 2011. If we look at the top line, which represents the percentage of households purchasing annuals, we'll notice that it peaked about 1999 when 35% of American households made the purchase of an annual plant. Today, about 1 in 3, or 29% of U.S. households, make a purchase of an annual transplant. Some good news is in the second line, which represents the percentage of households which purchased vegetable transplants. Back in 1995, only 17.2% of American households bought a vegetable transplant. Today, that's risen to about 1 in 4, 25% of U.S. households. Even more interesting is the third line, which represents the percentage of households that purchased herbs. Back in 1995, only 5.7% of American households made the purchase of an herb plant. But today, about 15% of U.S. households made the purchase of an herb plant. So we've seen some decreases and some increases, but next, let's look at overall spending. What this chart shows us is average spending per household in 2006 and average purchasing per household in 2011. What we see in lawn care, flower gardening, indoor houseplants, flowering bulbs, landscaping, and container gardening is a decline in household expenditures. Where did we see some increases? Well, between 2006 and 2011, the average household spent about $2 more on vegetable transplants, slightly more on tree care, and $2 more on herb gardening. When we look at the total, comparing average spending in 2006 with average spending in 2011, we can see a decline of almost $100 per household. That's a substantial decline. And combined with the reduced purchasing that we saw in the previous graph, now we better understand some of the industry concerns related to Gen X and Gen Y. So that gives you a quick basis of some of the industry published research that helps us understand where we are in terms of the demographic trends for Gen X and Gen Y. As you can now see, based on prior research, our industry very much needs younger consumers to begin falling in love with plants. In our next video, I'll tell you about what our consumer consultants told us about their attitudes toward plants in our local garden stores.